Good morning. And welcome to the April 19th, 2022 regular meeting. At this time, we will be going into closed session. Clerk, if you could please read out the closed session agenda.
Item number 1, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2, conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation, 2 cases, significant exposure to litigation.
At this time, is there any public comment?
There is no public comment.
And seeing none in the room, we will now convene in the closed session, and we will be back here at 9. Thank you. Good morning and welcome back to the regular meeting of April 19th, 2022. At this time, we came back from closed session. We have a report out for this closed session and last week's closed session. So I'm going to turn it over to the clerk.
Madam Chair, I'm going to start with March 22nd, then move on to April 12th, and then today's closed session. March 22nd, report out of closed session was item number 1, pursuant to Government Code Section 54657B1, Public Employment, Title Planning Director. There was no reportable board action. Item number 2, pursuant to Government Code Section 54657B1, Public Employee Performance Evaluation, Title County Council. There was no reportable action taken. Item number 3, pursuant to Government Code Section 54657B1, Public Employee Performance Evaluation, Title County Administrative Officer, there was no reportable action taken. Report out for the board meeting on April 12th. Item number 1, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1, conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation, County of Calaveras versus Discordia Ranches Limited Partnership et al., Calaveras County Superior Court case number 20CV45113. There was no reportable action taken. Item number 2, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2, conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation, 1 case, significant exposure to litigation, no reportable action taken. Report out from today's meeting, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2, conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation, 2 cases, significant exposure to litigation. There was no reportable action taken.
Thank you. And with that, if we could please stand for the pledge. Next is staff announcements, and I believe Ms. Medina is online.
Good morning, Madam Chair, respective board members, CAO Von Lotta, County Council, and Deputy Clerk of the Board, Lisa Medina, Environmental Management Agency. Today, I wanted to let our community know that we have another Focus in Animal Service free microchip and rabies clinic scheduled here at the Government Center for May 14th, Saturday, from 9 to noon. Dr. Michael Hayes will be our attending veterinarian. We are working towards a goal of ensuring that all of our cats and dogs are vaccinated against rabies to protect them against this deadly disease. If you are looking for an animal to add more joy and companionship to your home, we have several dogs, lovely dogs and fun dogs that are currently available for adoption, and they would love to be part of your family home. They include Topaz, Samson, Rojo, Roscoe, Bruno, Maya, Bambi, Coda, Mia, Molly, Hank, and Xander, who would love to go home with you. I am still working with our kitties on their glamour shots, so you should be seeing them hopefully by our next board meeting. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other staff announcements?
I do not see anybody else that wants to speak, no.
Thank you. Next is general public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it's determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. Is there any public comment? Is there any online?
None online.
Okay. Seeing none in the room and none online, we'll move on to consent agenda. We have multiple items for consent agenda, and is there any, at this time, we'll be pulling item 12 and withdrawing item number 17. Are there any other items that the board wishes to pull from consent? Any staff? Seeing none from staff, is there any public comment? Is there any online public comment?
No online public comment.
Okay. With that, is there a motion to approve consent agenda with 12 and 17 moved off?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Is there a
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So item 12 was pulled,
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify, Madam
Yeah.
Chair. 17 was
Withdrawn.
staff withdrew from today's agenda. Okay,
Correct.
and then 12 is being pulled for discussion. Got it.
correct.
Oh, being pulled for discussion, I thought.
Yeah, that was pulled, but these two withdrawn. Sorry. So I believe there's more, who do we have online here? Believe that a couple of the questions that came up regarding Calaveras' share of this, as well as what exactly are we share in the money of this. That's one question, but I believe Lee is online, or Gabriel. Which one of you is that? Both?
Yeah, good morning. We have Lee Kimball online, and I can provide any answers to the questions because Lee was actually part of the original team that put this item together. Now, she tells me that this has already been before the board in the past and certain actions were taking. So what we would want to address this morning specifically is what are the questions or issues that you have. I was told by the CEO last night that one of the questions you may have is, why is our allocation higher than the allocations for other jurisdictions? And so Lee Kimball has an answer to that, if that is the question you want to ask. But again, if you have any other questions, both of us are here. And I think Gina also should be somewhere around because she wrote the staff report for this item to answer any questions that you may have as well.
Lee?
Good morning. To answer the question in regards to the split between the 4 counties, the amount that is allocated to the counties, I don't know how the state determines how much is provided to each of the counties. When we started this project, Calaveras proposed it with Mariposa. Mariposa had staff expertise and availability to help put the project forward that we didn't have available at that time. They did not, their state allocation was not very big and ours was bigger. But I do want to make sure that you know that this isn't like buying 4 cars and we're giving 3 of them to the other counties. There's one product and in the end, which will be a workbook to help our citizens know how to put an ADU on their property so we can get more housing going. And Calaveras will get 100% of the value of this project. Calaveras would not be able to draw down these allocated funds unless we participated in a regional project. We started with Mariposa, and we were required to work with state consultants to develop the project. The state consultants brought Amador and Nevada on board. Tuolumne was invited, but they declined. Amador and Nevada already had projects in development, so they gave a portion of their funding to the project so that as a whole, all counties would benefit equally from having this product available to them. But everybody threw in what they could from those that were invited by the state. Mariposa and Calaveras threw in 100% of their allocation.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And welcome, Gabriel and Lee. It's good to see you. I went back and checked on, this was an agenda item on, as in the item on 19th, on January 19th of 2021. It was a consent agenda item. It did talk about this ADU handbook, but it wasn't a part of the resolution that was passed, so it wasn't deeply discussed. And I think we all recognize in January 2021 there was a lot going on in our country and in our boardrooms as we dealt with COVID. I have grave concerns about this. I'd like to know, I have several questions. The first one is, other counties are using only a portion to do this. I'd like to know what other ideas they have that we're not doing. 3, I have a hard time justifying spending, up to $344,478 to create a handbook on ADUs when Google pretty much squared me away last night in 10 minutes. Just saying. So I'd like to know 2 questions. What are the other counties doing that we're not? And 2, how do we justify to taxpayers this amount of money and spending 100% of our allocation, $200,000, to create a handbook when other, and I'd like to know what we're going to receive for this. I just have a lot of problems with this, Lee. So let's start with the easy one. What are the other counties doing that we're not doing?
I did not prepare an answer for that. I know Tuolumne County gave their funding regionally to their incorporated town of Sonora for a project, but I'm not aware of what that project was. And I haven't done the research on what other counties are doing. I became very involved on developing it for Calaveras County specific as a rural project because Calaveras County has 75% of our residents are landowners. We have a lot of land. We have arena in our housing element that we need to meet, and we need innovative strategies that will help to get development going in all of the income brackets. This strategy has been proven that where workbooks are available to people who are not commonly developers, that the percentage of return for people actually going through and putting an ADU on their property has a much greater return than when there is no promotion done. And you can get to some workbooks that we will be replicating in urban areas, but there hasn't been one developed for rural areas. And ours will include what financing is available locally, engineers, site development people, and prefabricated homes if a person chose to do that we could get through a pre-permitting process that will be unique to our county. So it will be a unique advantage to Calaveras residents will be part of this workbook. The workbooks that we are looking at developing are very, very user-friendly. They're intended to help people who maybe have never really done any construction to be able to move forward and answer the questions of processing and where you get support and financing and all the things to encourage it. And they have been shown to really exponentially improve the return. We don't have a lot of ADU permits going forward, and so we really want to dig into that potential, and that's the reason for proposing this one.
So other counties have, so there are other books like this that exist, is what you just said, right?
Yeah, you can see some. In fact, we,
right.
In our LEAP grant, have 2 Civic Sparks fellows who did the research, so we could find those workbooks that were best developed and got the best return so that we could replicate it, but unique to our county.
So we're going to take an existing book, edit it for $344,000. How many units do we expect this $200,000 investment to go? Because, and is this, do you really believe that this is the best and highest use of these funds to create housing?
I do. And it's because I think that a lot of the development proposals that are out there, quite honestly, are very urban. And urban have different barriers and they have different resources. So when we go to develop innovative projects to improve our development for Calaveras County, not us building it, but making it possible for people to build, we have to look at what unique resources we have, not just our barriers. We're having trouble attracting developers to develop housing in the lower and moderate income, and this really addresses that. ADUs also address our aging population. We have a higher than state average. So people putting a second home on to house their parents, or for them to go in it while they rent out their houses as they age and have a smaller home that they can maintain and have an independent life a little bit longer, really does fit our demographic and the resources that we have.
Lee, and I'll pass the microphone, but Lee, you didn't answer the question of how many housing units we think, and I appreciate you committing that this is the highest and best use. What are some other uses that we could have used this money for when you did your analysis of making this the highest and best use? What are the options that are there on the table?
There was a short turnaround time from the time that I came on board to develop this. So I'm not going to say we explored all of our options.
It was 16 months ago we did this. So what are the options that we've developed?
So from the time that I came on board till the time that we had to submit an application, we did not have a lot of time to get a ton of options available. And the funding is only for planning. That's all it's for. It's not for implementation of any project. So this was the one that we proposed that got support from the state.
So no other options. All right. Madam Chair, I have no further questions, but I will not be supporting this item.
Are there any other board supervisors stopping?
Not so much as a question as prior to this grant, I mean, there have been other things that had come before the board as possible solutions, and the board had decided not to go with those. So, I completely agree with your point, Mr. Garamendi. At the same time, we, as a board, have limited those in the past on their options also. So just to take that into account as we move forward.
No, I agree, Mr. Stopper, and we have. And we sent them back for better ideas. I believe the last one we had was to give loans to developers. And we didn't have other options there. I'm not so sure we're moving the ball down the field.
Right, yeah, no, it's not a loan if it's forgivable also, so it doesn't become revolving. I understand completely.
Right. So
it's a tough issue
right,
all the way around.
I would like to have ideas that are concrete. I mean, we talked about having a meeting at some point, a study session of how we can incentivize and create more housing. I mean, we've talked about that multiple times up here. I would just really like to have that conversation.
Supervisor Garamendi, I do want to say that the prior proposal for loans is a totally different pot of money that had 10 allowable activities. REAP, the one that we're talking about today, was a first round, and it was very broad in what could be done, and that's why we were required to work with the technical assistance from consultants from the state to help develop a project, because they were looking at the best ways to get more housing development going. So the two shouldn't be compared. They're very different funding streams with different parameters.
Vice Chair?
Yeah, I just I'm having a hard time, like Jack, understanding this and how the California state would give out this kind of money just to develop a handbook. So if I want to put an accessory dwelling on my property, once this is developed, I walk into the building department and immediately I'm just handed over a book?
No.
And here's a book, go read the book and then come back?
No. Thank you for asking that question because I think that's a misunderstanding. This is an electronic online book that's an interactive workbook. Who our audience that we're targeting are people who are just your everyday landowners. Can now, because the laws have changed in California, can put a second housing unit on their property. And there are many ways to do it. It can be up to 1,200 square feet. It can be a garage apartment, a separate unit. There's many different ways to do it. What we're finding to get folks who haven't been in construction or development not afraid of the process is following other counties' leads that have had success with this, is creating this interactive that asks the questions that most people who are not in development would need to know about how to get a project going. The return that I would anticipate is from 0 to 1 permits per year for an ADU to 10 to 12 a year. And over 10 years, that takes care of 10% of our RENA need. It may be higher than that. Other counties have had success by doing interactive workbooks combined with technical assistance. So you don't walk in to a planning department and not even know what questions to ask.
I hear what you're saying, but I still, regardless if we have this handbook or not, it's going to be up to somebody that wants to put a dwelling on their property, whether it's a garage apartment, whether it's additional building, whatever. They're still going to have to want to do that. This book isn't going to make them just say, wow, I'm going to do this because I read this book, or I went online and saw this book on the county. They're still going to have interest in order to do it. And to me, we can give that information to them if they come to the counter or they have a contractor. Most of them are going to have to hire a contractor to do the dwelling and get a building permit. And so that information can be available to them, I would think, without spending this kind of money for a book that explains all that to them. They're still going to want to have to put a dwelling on their property before they even come forward for this. I don't see how this is going to entice them to do that. If they either have the money for it or they don't.
Where's the marketing for it?
So, thank you, though, Lee. Thank you.
I would like to say, Supervisor Tofinelli, that the studies don't agree with that. There have been studies done in communities that are using interactive workbooks where people are curious but don't know where to ask the questions. This gets them informed enough that they now can move forward. And remember, our workbook will address financing and other ways to get the projects going, cost-benefit ratios, calculators, things that really answer the deeper questions to take some of the fear of developing a second home on your property out. And the studies are showing that there's quite a good return on before and after how many permits go out for ADUs once there is this technical assistance available.
And where's that information located that you're quoting that we can look to see that that it does increase the...
I do have a graph. I don't have it at my fingertips, but I could email it to you later today if you would like me to do that.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate it if you would. Thank you.
Sure.
Supervisor Callaway?
Ms. Kimball, thank you for the explanation. I think in listening to my colleagues and all, we're getting caught up in the word workbook, and we need to move forward, and we need to take some creative action on trying it. And I guess I've seen you come before us, and I've spoken with you, and we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. And I feel like we need to support the efforts and take your recommendation on this. I also got caught up in the word workbook and, you know, a 25-page booklet that we hand out. And in listening to you, it's a lot more sophisticated than that. And I will overlook the word workbook and support your recommendation.
But it is a workbook.
I
So
know,
today, what?
How can we overlook it? That's what it is.
Well, it is, but I mean, she said it's an
Good point.
interactive.
Supervisor
It's
Garamendi,
not-
good point.
She said it's interactive, online.
interaction.
It's not as if I'm going to the counter and getting something on a 10-page document.
And today, what's before all of you is not the project. That resolution to pursue an EDU workbook was actually before you earlier and was passed. And the contract has been
That's not
signed by the state. So that what's before you today is the MOU with Mariposa, who is taking the lead in getting the calls and the project quotes from the consultants. The funding is to pay the consultant to develop this for us and to allow us to pay through Mariposa as the fiscal agent for these services.
I just want to point out that the resolution on the 19th of January 2021 did not speak to the handbook. The agenda item did. So that's not exactly correct. It's partially correct.
Are there any
Are you
other?
saying Mariposa County is implementing this for us?
They're the lead
said?
in, when we hire a consultant by 4 counties, only 1 county has the contract with the consultant. So Mariposa has agreed, they put out the request for projects to get the quotes, and they would be the fiscal agent paying, with all 4 counties contributing their portion towards that payment. And that's what this MOU is for.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I have a couple questions for you. In this workbook, are we adjusting the high and low elevations and the differences of ADUs to be built? Because let's use Supervisor Callaway's district. There are different requirements with the snow that are going to be drastically different for a contractor that is in Supervisor Stopper's district. Those are
Absolutely.
basic questions that no one really thinks about unless there's snow on the ground. The other question is how are we factoring utilities? Because we all want this, we want options, but we can't support this without the partnership of utility districts, and if they do not have the capacity to hold these ADUs on their system, we're in another issue, which goes back to the question of Supervisor Garamendi's question of how do we really look at this robustly? I mean, are we tackling the issue that's going to really move us ahead in meeting the elements of housing? Because until the infrastructure is fixed, we can sit here all day long and support these, but we don't have a foundation to support that long-term goal.
Absolutely hear you. Excellent points. So the utilities districts has a quarterly meeting and have volunteered to be part of the development of this project unique to our needs. While we're following ideas that have been created by Urban, we are making this specific to the exact questions you're talking about in our rural areas. The elevation, site development is different, septic systems and other things that urban areas aren't going to be addressing will be part of what's in there that will help take all of that complexity to a level that we can connect to local engineers, local vendors, local utility districts to participate in this. And the utility districts are already aware of this project and have asked to be part of it. I'd also just like to let you all know, this was the first round for this type of funding for California. Round 2 is coming up and will be not just planning, but implementation. So I'm very much hoping that as we sit at the table and discuss options, because now we have time for round 2, that we'll be able to partner with our utility districts to look at what infrastructure is needed to open up, hopefully, whole corridors with this funding that will make more development possible.
And then
That's coming up.
one last question or comment. This could have been changed by now, but my understanding is that most ADUs in this county are subject to the same permit fees of a new construction house of 7,000 square feet. So are we addressing in this the matrix to make this actually affordable? Because the square footage is different. And to my knowledge, we have not addressed that in this county. Unless it's recently done.
That is not part of this project. So any fee changes is a bigger conversation that is not part of this project.
And that includes RIM, because road impact mitigation, other impact mitigations, is that going to be addressed in this workbook as well? Because those are some of the foundation structural that unless this is going to work, we have not addressed internally at this. And so it's, even if we get this, we have no way to properly, affordably implement this workbook. And those are the concerns that I have. I understand the higher level of where we're going at, but I'm not going to be dancing out in front of the board chair saying, hey, we have this workbook now, when we haven't even addressed the internal controls to make this workbook achievable. And so we need to after today, we need to figure out how to bring that back and make this an overlap, because with all due respect, you're not going to be successful in accomplishing this if we don't address these issues right here. And I know it's a broken record, but it's things that are the hidden cost of these housing element implementations that we're not talking about.
Madam Supervisor, if I may chime in a little bit. From the little I've heard, I think there are some significant concerns about this particular item going forward. One of the questions that I would like to provide to the Board of Supervisors is, one, the number of ADUs that we could actually get with this handbook. Number two, we understand that ADUs are mandated by the state, but I need to figure out whether or not how much the building department would actually charge for a permit to build an ADU. That is a question that I think you would like to know. Number three, some of the other associated issues with development, are those addressed as part of this particular grant? And it seems like the answers are not very, very precise. So with your indulgence, I think what we need to do is to backtrack a little bit and provide you with the precise information that you want, so that next time you see this item, you will feel more confident as to which direction really you want to go. And if it's one of those projects whereby, you know, the cons outweighs the pros, then I think we can address those, because I've heard from at least 4 of the supervisors, and it seems like there is a bit of reservation as to, one, the amount, which is being justified by the fact that this is what we asked for. We're putting in 100% of our allocation into this. Number two, how many ADUs are we actually going to get? One thing I can tell you is that I don't think the number of ADUs is going to solve our arena allocation. I mean, that's a fact. We're not going to build ADUs and meet arena numbers. There has to be a mixture of other development, you know, high density, medium density, low density, et cetera, et cetera. So from an arena standpoint, there is an effect. So we need to measure specifically what that effect is. This gives us, over realizing that our housing element is over an 8-year period, how many ADUs are we actually going to build by the time the housing element cycle ends that will satisfy our arena numbers. So these are some of the issues that I think we need to resolve unless that this information has already been provided somewhere in the past, and we need to go and revive them and bring them back and be able to provide you with a more robust presentation. Lee, do you have any comments about that?
I'd be very happy to get specific questions that we can come back with to answer this. What I would say is we have 3 other counties in the state partnering with us on this, and the project has been greatly delayed. So if we're not going to do this, we have to also consider consequences to our partnership.
Which is where I'm going to go, Madam Chair, if I can.
Yep.
You know, whether the information was fully provided January 1st last year or not, we did vote to move forward with this. At that point, this is the first round of REAP funds. With other rounds of REAP funds coming in the future, those will be contingent on how successful we go through the process with this original round. Some of the things Madam Chair brought up are kind of like apples and oranges in my mind on it, but the final point she has is absolutely correct. And I think Mr. Garamendi brought it up earlier, is we've asked to have a study session on these type of issues. It hasn't been brought forward to us. I'm not pointing any fingers any which way, but as we move forward as a county, we need to have this broad conversation. That way, the staff has the intent of the board moving forward in mind. And I think that's the point that Ms. Fullendorf was getting to, and I completely agree with it. At this point, I hear the concerns of the board. A lot of them are mine. I mean, I would not spend $200,000 on this type of workbook and then, you know, have it linger there, because how do we present this to the people across the county? You know, I have issues with it, but as we move forward, I think that we could put ourselves in parity of future money, that if we do not implement this properly, because we already went through the process with the state to get this grant, and we are working and coordinating with other counties. So I'm torn both ways on this issue, but I got to say, we got to be cautious when we just shoot something like this down, because in the future, it could bite us when we go in for something that the board actually wants.
Supervisor Callaway, your light on?
Yeah, I mean, part of the issues that I think you brought up would not be addressed in this. For example, we have a RIM fee. Doesn't mean that all counties have a RIM fee. So that would be a separate issue. In terms of the building codes on higher elevations, lower, that's under the Uniform Building Code. So the actual physical structure is a separate issue than what is before us. And I feel that those issues, or the costs and so forth, would be dealt with through the building department. And we control the fees. And if we decide we don't want whatever the fee is now for an ADU, we want it to be less, then that's our decision. That's not a decision that would come under this workbook. I have to choke on the word. So I agree with Mr. Stopper that I think it's in our best interest to support this. And the issues that you brought up regarding building codes, the RIM fees, are something that we would discuss as a separate issue and can be done at any time. we did discuss the concept of ADUs when the housing element was brought before us. So we've been talking about it, if I heard Supervisor Garamendi, since over a year. And it's time we do something to move forward. I too choke on the money because I have a hard time understanding the concept of what Ms. Kimball's saying with the words that I'm reading. She's brought more clarity to it, and I think the issues are different and need to be dealt with differently. I don't expect this to deal with building codes and fees.
I disagree with both Supervisor Stopper and Callaway on that. I think they do go hand in hand because the everyday person that's going to walk in the door do not understand the hidden cost of what it takes to build something. Most of them already live in a house that's already built, and when they're looking to add on and expand and put another building, most do not realize the hookup fees. And while we don't control that, the special districts do, or the room fees, or the school fees, it does come up. And whether we want to, it may be separate, but when you're trying to educate your constituents that have no idea, we are lucky, we understand that because we deal with it all the time. It's not going to be, those are not the questions they are going to know to ask. And so if we are going to be getting the big bang of this buck of $200,000, my expectation is we've got to educate them from the top down and everything in between. Otherwise, we're still paying $200,000 for what? To then still show up to the counter and be like, oopsie, by the way, there's this. You got to go ask the school board on another impact fee, or you've got to go talk to Public Works on the rim. So there is overlap. They might be oranges and apples, but they're still part of the educational process of when they're calculating the cost factor of what this reality is going to be to add another building.
If I may, Madam Chair. So I just, to take a step back, I think it's good to keep in mind that what you all are discussing, these two things are not mutually exclusive. And we can bring back a study session. I remind the board that one of the items we'll be discussing next month is the proverbial study session on study sessions, and that is to in fact set Q3 and Q4 of the calendar year study sessions. So pending your direction, we can certainly get a study session on the big picture of this and what the full fee structure, to use Chair Follendorf's expression, the hidden costs of development for ADUs on the one hand, and address your board's concerns in those respects, and still move this item forward such that the funding isn't lost and whatever future funding is available for actually implementation as opposed to preparation is still on the table for us as a county, and take a two-pronged attack toward getting to where I think I'm hearing where your board wants to be.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you. And I'll stop beating on this horse here in a second. But a proverbial study session on study sessions, we had one of those in January, and we came up with a list. I don't have those in front of me. I'm willing to bet this was on the list.
I actually beg to differ.
Okay.
Supervisor Garamendi, it's not.
Well, I'd be curious what's on that list and how we're going through that. I want to point out that we're spending $200,000. That's the fully weighted cost of a chief building official. So if we have to do planning and we're talking about all these things, cost and everything, perhaps there were other options that we could have used on this. I want to point out that we're talking about, I hope we've got in this proposal to print the book, even though we're talking about, I'm guessing that we're talking about a print book, although it's a digital world. So we'd have to find a way to host it and post it. And finally, this is what I talked about before when we had housing issue. I want to see some creativity. What's traditionally worked is not working for our county. We need some good new ideas to figure out how to break this thing loose. And that's what I would like to expect from staff, is some good ideas, new ideas, things we haven't thought of. We have to change. We have a losing game. We have to change the game. That's all I got.
I
I'll take
concur
forward.
with you, Mr. Garamendi. We have to be creative, and that's us. I mean, with staff working with us. And I've sat down and talked to our chief building official, Mr. Oliver, about this quite a bit recently, broadly about everything in the county, and how, just personally, my perspective, not necessarily the board's perspective as a whole. And, I think he has full intent. We have a new planning director, and that needs to be part of the conversation as we move forward, both of them along with Ms. Kimball. So I think that we didn't necessarily put that on our priorities for study sessions in January, but I think right now the board's asking for it to be a priority. That's what I'm hearing.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
Maria had a light on first.
Ms. Kimball, is there a way we could use part of the 200 to finance the
No, none of
recreation?
this funding in round one was for anything other than regional planning projects. So that makes sense when you're in an urban county with a lot of incorporated cities to do. It's a little tougher to do in rural counties that sometimes have no incorporated or one incorporated, to figure out what that region would look like. So for the state, this was a very creative and innovative proposal, very rurally focused. The funding that's coming up in round two does allow implementation. We could, through this or through PLHA funds in the next round, ask to change to be able to help with fees or other ways to incentivize financing. And the fee schedule will be part of the book. This is the way these workbooks work is they're layered, so you kind of get the enticing, drawing the curiosity in, and then you work your way down into the harder questions that you wouldn't start off with, so people are fully informed on things they might not even know how to ask, on hidden costs and site development and things that would not necessarily be part of a homeowner's understanding.
Okay, if we don't approve of this, what is the possible ramifications to us for phase two and so forth? Thank you.
So my understanding is what's before you today is the memorandum of understanding so that we can pay for our portion of the project through Mariposa, reimburse them for the cost. If you are asking us to return the funds to California and not do this project at all, I would say besides that these monies that are allocated to Calaveras will be lost to other counties, we'll also not have done a good job as partners. We spent quite a bit of project developing this, not only with HCD, but with 3 other counties. And partnerships are important resource, especially in rural areas, to developing projects. So to me, that's a huge concern, because right now the project stands as having been approved and the contract has been signed with the state, but we haven't made the MOU or the Memorandum of Understanding with Mariposa so that they can go ahead and hire and pay the consultant to get the project going.
Later.
Yes. Lee, is there a time frame for this to be completed? Do we have, like...
It's a 1 year, so we're hoping by fall to be done. I brought on 2 Civic Sparks fellows. These are college graduates new into the professional world who have been doing the background research because the state was very late in getting us our contract. So we've been doing the research specific to Calaveras so that it's ready. That's how I know we have the graph showing that this actually has been very successful. We did some research on other counties that have done workbooks and looked at what they're doing so we know what we want to do and what we don't want to do in ours. Also, we've started an outreach plan and a website development that we've done so that as soon as this is published, we're ready to roll with Google and Facebook ads to get people who are asking questions anywhere in Calaveras to our website so that they can get to this workbook. So there's already a lot of work already in motion.
Is there a public outreach for comments included in this process of going forward? If we vote today to do this, would you have a public meeting? Would you have public outreach for their input or education or anything like that?
We have a strategic outreach plan absolutely going, and we're starting to develop a website page for this. So we're already in motion on putting those parts together.
Okay, sounds like...
What we don't have is the consultant developing it and putting the content that's unique to our 4 counties.
Understood. It sounds like we have a lot of time invested in this, staff does. And is that being covered by the $10,000 that's in this grant for administrative costs?
Yes.
So we're already tapping it. Okay, Lee, I'm going to support you.
Thank
I
you.
have some qualms about the money that Jack has brought up, but I'm going to trust you. I'm going to support you to go through with it and send me the information that showed how this will help and the statistics in it to me so I can look at that. But I will support you going forward.
Thank you.
Are there any other board comments before I bring it to public comment? Seeing none, is there any public comment?
There is no public comment.
Okay. Seeing none in the room, bring it back to the board.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
you know, I think Gary said it very clearly. I hear explicitly what Mr. Garamendi is saying, and I agree with him. But a matter of caution, we made a deal and already with other counties to move forward, you know, and this could jeopardize, with the fact that this could possibly jeopardize us moving forward on REAP funds in the future that we could apply in the way we want. I will make a motion to approve and authorize the board chair to sign a memorandum of understanding between the Calaveras, Mariposa, Nevada, and Amarillo counties, formalizing respective responsibilities to implement the REAP regional project.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll make the second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nay. 4-1.
The item is approved on a 4-1 vote of the board.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that.
With that, we're going to take a 5-minute break here, and then we will convene to the regular agenda. Thank you. Welcome back. At this time, we'll go to regular agenda item number 19, as we have withdrawn item number 18. Clerk.
Item number 19 is an informational item from the administrative office to discuss and provide staff direction regarding fleet management.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Krista Onletta, Administrative Office. It is my great pleasure to present Assistant CAO Marcus Munoz, Analyst Jamie Barger, and their initial presentation to this board. Welcome. Thank you both so much for all of your hard work on this. I'm very excited to see you present to the board for the first time. And with that, I will turn it over.
Awesome. I'm going to pass it over to Jamie to get us started.
Turn your microphone. There you go.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. As discussed, we're bringing forward to you the topic of fleet management. We're going to go over the background of fleet management, give you an overview of our county fleet, considerations, and then discussion with hopefully some high-level direction from your board on what you would like us to pursue going forward. With the background, you generally have 3 different model types for fleet management. You have a centralized, a decentralized, and a hybrid. A centralized fleet is usually with a fleet manager and department that runs the entire fleet. You have decentralized, which is what Calaveras County has currently, which is ran by individual departments. And then you have a hybrid where general fund departments usually have a pooled fleet, and then the non-general departments run their own fleet with some special factors in there depending on funding. Currently, we have, and the majority of these vehicles should be non-specialty vehicles. So we're not talking the dump trucks, water trucks, but it does include sheriff's vehicles, probation. So we currently have over 300 vehicles in our fleet. Roughly purchase value is over $10 million. 190 of those are by the general fund, which equal about 6.5 million, a little over. And then 130 are owned by non-general fund departments, which is just over 3 million. In-service age. So this isn't necessarily the vehicle age, but in which the county put the vehicle into service. We have over 60 vehicles that are 20 years or older. We have 100 that are 10 to 19 years of age, over 45 vehicles that are between 6 and 9 years, over 100 vehicles that are 5 years or younger. We did look a little bit into mileage. Our Public Works Department, they tend to put the most miles on their vehicle. Most of their vehicles are retired at over 200 miles or 200,000 miles. Some of our other departments are on the lower side. They get retired at 20 years or older with 60 to 80,000 miles on average, so they're not driven as much. The majority of our vehicles are owned. Public Works, however, does lease 8 vehicles. I did want to talk to surplus a little bit. So this last fiscal year, the county surplus 63 vehicles. 20 of those were from general fund departments, which gave us back $31,614, which on average was about $1,500 per vehicle that we got back for the general fund. 43 of those were non-general fund departments. That was over $228,000 that was brought back, but some of those were larger item equipment, so it's not as comparable to the general fund surplus vehicles. Current issues. We currently have no defined fleet management policy and procedures, so there's no requirements with vehicle utilization and minimum use. There's no vehicle replacement guidelines. There's no repair expenditure limits, no vehicle acquisition limits, and no maintenance or repair schedule. There's too many vehicles in our fleet. There's several vehicles, I know you guys have seen them, that just sit out in our parking lots and don't get utilized. There could be a need or ability to share some of those vehicles that aren't being as utilized or transfer them to a department that has a need to utilize it even more. We also have a redundant of vehicles. There's some examples like the custodians use their cars after hours, so do they need their own vehicle, or could they utilize a vehicle that's being utilized by a different department? There's other departments that occasionally need a vehicle, like admin, for example. We may drive a vehicle 3 to 4 times a year. Do we need our own vehicle, or could it be shared with another department? Considerations, vehicle standardization. This could be done with looking at the optimal match of needs and resources and opportunities for consolidating and pooling of vehicles. This could be looked at through 2 ways, a fleet sizing evaluation and a fleet assessment to really find out what the county needs and what it would look like to accomplish that. A vehicle life cycle management process. This would increase vehicle use and improve efficiency. Looking at that minimum use, again, if you're having a car that's only being driven 2,000 miles a year, that's not the optimal use of that vehicle, and is the maintenance being done? And then vehicle replacement guidelines, looking at conditions, miles, age, and repair expenditure limits to make sure you're getting the fullest use out of the vehicle, life cycle out of the vehicle. We wanted to just talk briefly on lease versus own. There are some pros when it comes to leasing, that optimal match of needs and resources. That talks to you have a higher buying value when you're leasing multiple vehicles at one time. The chance of you getting that vehicle sooner is greater versus those one-off vehicles. And I know our sheriff's office has talked a lot about supply issues. So leasing would help reduce some of that. You do have a higher resale value. So in talking earlier that the general fund cars generally got about $1,500 in return, when you're reselling it at the end of the life, which was 6 years, I believe, you're getting $8,000 towards your next lease. So you're getting a way bigger bang for your buck, if you will. A reduction in maintenance costs because you're turning over cars more frequently. You're not putting as many repairs on them. You're not having to buy as many tires, especially if you've done the assessment and we don't have as many as we have now. You'll get more use out of vehicles. Efficient replacement schedules, so you won't have to wonder why departments are surplusing the vehicles that they're surplusing. And then definitely a decrease in vehicle clutter. Cons could be an initial upfront cost, depending on how many cars we would want to, if lease was an option, how many cars you would want to lease up front. You saw that you don't get necessarily a big resale value in what we have currently, so there would be some initial costs if we look towards that model. Future needs and recommendations. Electric vehicles and infrastructure. This is a huge topic in the state of California. As most know, by 2035, the state of California is mandating that all new vehicles are electric. With that, in an effort to implement and phase in electric charging stations, our office will work with our partner COG. COG is working to identify the county's charging stations infrastructure needs and also identify locations in which those would best be suited. So it's definitely an ongoing discussion and need. And then backtracking to that lease option, if you're looking at leased vehicles, that's another way that we can slowly start implementing some of these electric vehicles into our fleet through the lease option, so we can get there sooner than later. Another recommendation, again, is that needs assessment. What does our county really need for fleet? And what does that look like going forward, especially with the management and looking at that centralized, decentralized, and hybrid model? First and foremost, I definitely think a fleet management policy and procedures is really needed to look at that life cycle of vehicles. Why are vehicles being purchased? How frequently are they being purchased? How often are they being maintained? All of that. And then again, potentially looking at that pooled vehicle option. And at that point, we open it up. Was there anything you thought I missed?
No, thank you, Jamie. We're open for questions. If you have any additional questions you'd like to ask about our fleet.
Supervisor Garamendi?
Actually, Supervisor Stopper has that on for me, but.
Nice presentation, Jamie. Spoken well. I have a little experience with working with a lease fleet with another special district, and in that experience, like larger utility vehicles that tend to, you start putting boxes for the mechanics on certain vehicles for public works, or even the sheriff's department, where the situations they put themselves on, they're very hard on. So there's a high level of maintenance that if you own the vehicle, falls back on the whoever's maintaining it. Do these lease options that you're looking at right now include that maintenance with the lease? Because typically what I'm seeing from the other side is so there's a continued savings over time. As another one of the benefits. Is that part of it?
So you could do both. So there are two options where you could do the maintenance through them and they identify a shop that the vehicles are able to go to. They are willing to work because they know we're in a rural county. So if there's a shop that's not on their preferred vendor list, that shop can work with them to get on that preferred vendor list. But yes, that maintenance can definitely be included in that package.
Yeah, because like with the mechanics, for public works, for example, F-550s, you put those boxes on, they got those lift cranes on them for heavy equipment that they're working on and everything else. And regardless of how well the truck's built, it still breaks down, especially with the new smog laws that apply to to these diesels and everything else?
So Public Works did opt for theirs since they have their own shop. Their lease didn't include the maintenance package because they have their own shop. But if you were looking, for example, let's say facilities was going to be leased vehicles, we would look at having an outside shop part of that package that would just maintain, and then facilities would make sure they're doing their, quarterly or yearly maintenance on those vehicles.
So that's where the question comes in. So, with Public Works offering their mechanics in their shop to be the shop of choice, at that point, is the leasing company paying them to fix the leased vehicles because they aren't owned by us?
No, so they just didn't get the maintenance. And Mark Kinsley could probably talk better to it to make sure I'm saying this right. From my understanding is they just opted out of that maintenance package. So they are paying, so it's not included in their lease, but they are paying for maintenance. So it's just separate on that.
Yeah. As we move forward with this discussion, I'd be curious to see what the difference on those numbers are.
Definitely.
Because we pay quite a bit of money every year working on our vehicles, and there's a lot of vehicles that Public Works has that they can work on that aren't necessarily on this list because the heavy equipment, I assume, is not
Correct.
part of that.
And one thing I want to point out about shops, that you do have to be on the preferred maintenance, the preferred vendor list. And so not all of our shops are on that. We have, in fact, I think very few shops, so we would have to work with the vendor in order to get our local vendors on that list.
Once we get one of our local vendors on the list, I would assume that's a mechanic shop. At that point, they would see a benefit in the economy as they're getting more trucks and work and paid by the leaser.
You're creating that partnership.
The leaser, yeah.
Supervisor Garamendi?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a good presentation. 300 vehicles, that's almost one for every other employee we've got. So I appreciate wanting to get this under control. What is our feedback? We've had a lease program, this board supported with Enterprise Public Works. Has that been a success?
Yes, Mark really likes it, and one of the big things that he talked to is that ability to get a number of cars at one time where, again, that buying that one off, the supply and demand just isn't great. So you do, usually at the beginning of the year, go in with that buying power. And he also said, which I was unaware, that some of those vehicles can be outfitted. So just because we're leasing doesn't mean that we can't outfit it to fit some of the needs. I don't know that you'd want to lease a patrol car, but it's definitely something that, can be explored.
Right. Well, I would certainly understand. You're probably not going to get greater from Enterprise, and you may not get a squad car, but who knows? Maybe they do have those resources. They buy in bigger quantities than we do.
Exactly, especially with the, just the lack of supply right now. It's really hard.
I certainly support what we're talking about here. And when we have a policy, when will this board see our new car policy?
That is something we're currently working on. So the policies themselves are going to be tailored to the model we eventually move towards. While most of them crossover models, there'll be some tweaks that will be necessary depending on which model we choose or which model we decide to move forward with. But overall, that is something we're trying to do before the end of the calendar year.
Okay, so we'll see this policy updated before the end of the calendar year?
Yes.
Okay, and will we take that into, will we be able to account for any of that? Will that go into the next fiscal year planning, or is it going to come into this fiscal year? Because I'm sure we've got cars coming up in this fiscal year's budget from different departments.
Yes, we have several requests for vehicles that will be in this year's recommended budget. We do not anticipate having the policies and procedures done before then, because that's right around the corner, but we will definitely look at writing these policies and procedures and then implementing them shortly after.
And this, we still haven't approved a purchasing policy yet, have we?
No.
Not at this
No.
time.
So will this be coming at the same time since it's similar? Or purchasing, I know, has been on the list for as long as I've been here.
Yeah.
So
Purchasing has indeed, Supervisor Garamendi, been on the list for some time, and it has not fallen off of our radar. However, we're looking at this as more of a standalone that will be integrated with the ultimate purchasing ordinance and policy. But at this point, this is a separate discussion.
okay. I see Mark joined. Does he have anything? I mean, that's all my questions. I don't know if you wanted to comment on the enterprise agreement.
So thank you for the opportunity, Supervisor. We actually have been very successful with our enterprise program. There is obviously some challenges with the current state of the availability of vehicles. You know, with the purchase of vehicles, there's obviously supply chain issues. That also extends to the lease of vehicles. So we had a meeting this morning, our road superintendent, our equipment superintendent, myself, and our representative from Enterprise. One of the things that we found is that the order banks aren't opening up for, excuse me, for vehicles for next year. So, for instance, they anticipate some opening in October for certain models of Ford. So between now and then, we can't order any of those. And then once the order banks do open in October, if that's truly when it happens, the likelihood of receiving those vehicles that we would order in October wouldn't hit until probably sometime next summer. So there are challenges with both, you know, with purchasing and leasing right now. But so far, the program, aside from the supply chain issue, has been pretty successful for us.
Rita?
Supervisor Callaway.
Thank you. I have several questions. Of the non-general funds run their own fleet, can that be part of shared vehicles? And do they lease, do they own?
Right, so when it comes to purchasing vehicles, typically the non-general fund uses grant funding or funding that has certain restrictions on it. So for example, I think of our mental health department, they can only purchase vehicles that are used in providing the services for mental, so we could not pull those vehicles into a general fleet.
So HHSA has quite a few vehicles that are just sitting in the parking lot. Can they share among themselves if they're HHSA units?
Yes, and currently, so HHSA themselves has roughly 59 vehicles total, and that includes their social services, mental health, public health departments, and they do utilize the vehicles within the department. So for example, social services has roughly 25 to 30 of those vehicles. They use them within that department, and they share amongst those folks. If another department was to use those vehicles, they could always allow them to, but do a chargeback for the mileage used.
So if mental health wants to use a social services vehicle, they have to do a chargeback?
They could, but mental health does have their own fleet as well, and they utilize those vehicles.
Okay, so here we have a department that has a lot more vehicles than what they utilize, and other either non-general fund or general fund departments cannot use those vehicles, correct?
So they do share currently. So we just had, when we took the last surplus item to the board, HHSA presented a vehicle first and said, would any other department like this vehicle before we surplus it? And at that time, facilities stepped up and jumped on the opportunity to have this vehicle and then get one of their fleet. What I think we could talk about in this purchase or in the fleet policy and procedures is making sure that departments aren't sitting on vehicles, and that's kind of where that minimum use comes in, that if you're not driving, let's say 10,000 miles a year on this car, do you really need this car? Is there another department that could utilize this car for 10,000 miles a year? Are you maintaining it? So keeping those parameters would help keep them not just having a vehicle get cobwebs in the parking lot. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, it's not the getting rid of, it's the utilization.
Mm-hmm. So part of the policy that Marcos and I were looking at is we would want that minimum utilization. We don't want cars that are just being driven 1,000 miles a year. It seems like that's not needed. There's probably another vehicle that's being driven 3,000 miles a year. So then combine that, you only need that one vehicle. And that's part of that needs assessment. We really need to find out, okay, how many vehicles does HHSA really need? How many vehicles are being driven every single day? How many are being driven a couple times a week? And then how often are very often whatsoever. Now there might be a specialty vehicle that might have to be an exception, like you were talking about the special van with the lift. That might not be driven as much as something else, but you would take into effect because it's a little bit more of a specialty vehicle.
So I do want to point out, so HHSA, so it is more human nature. When you go out to a parking lot, you see a 2022 vehicle versus a 2006 vehicle. The first vehicle you're inclined to go to is the 2022. So hence, it creates this, once you hit a certain point, less mileage being put on vehicles. And that's why Jamie is speaking to having a certain mileage recommendation that needs to be utilized per vehicle. However, it doesn't mean HHSA is not utilizing their vehicles. They do have a 2013 vehicle, which is right around 200,000 miles. And so it is being utilized very often. But there are all the specialty vehicles. For example, they have a truck that they use in emergencies to pull the trailers or when they have to provide services to a client that requires the use of a truck. But when you look at that vehicle is a 2014, and it's only 20,000 miles. So there is a big disparity on the use of vehicles, and that's why we are looking to implement policies regarding how many miles are actually used each year.
Okay. Do we have a system in place that determines the operating cost of a vehicle? So every time the tires are changed or the oil is changed or oops, I need to go in and get something mechanically done, because you could have a vehicle at 100,000 miles that's costing you a lot more to operate than 200,000. But we don't have a way to track that, do we?
Correct. The larger departments do have somebody who generally oversees the fleet. So for example, HHSA, they do have an individual who tracks all of those expenses. Every year at budget time, they review to see how much money they're putting in to each vehicle. If it is a high-cost vehicle, that's when they look at surplusing them out and purchasing a new vehicle. Some departments, though, on the flip side of that, typically if it's the smaller department, they may not have that person, so that may not be done.
We have looked at, in some of the policies that we looked at in researching, that table that would do the life of a vehicle, so what year it is and what is the appropriate amount that can be billed per year to fix it, and at what point does it, cost more, you're right, to have in the fleet than not, and at that point, then it would be surplus.
But is that generic or is that specific to a vehicle? So let's take the general, let's just take general fund departments, and they all have vehicles. Do we know the cost to operate each specific vehicle? We don't.
Currently, no.
I can't believe we don't have a system in place. I mean, there's ones you could buy off the shelf that helps you manage the cost of a vehicle. So I guess
it's definitely a need. 100%.
I'd like to see that. Also, and I kind of sent that in to Marcus, what about allowing employees to drive their own vehicle? I mean, they get X amount per mile, they give the county a copy of the insurance with the county of a named insured. That way, if they stop at the grocery store or pick up their kids or go to the post office or stop and have a beer after work, they're in their own vehicle. They're not in a vehicle that's got a seal on it.
Right. Currently, we reimburse employees at 58.5 cents per mile. So just the simple math, at a $35,000 vehicle, roughly, I mean, you reach that amount pretty quickly. So it is, I'm trying to do the math in my head right now, but it is essentially 60,000 miles to hit a $35,000 vehicle. So at the same amount of me putting 60,000 miles on a vehicle, if I was to reimburse employees, they would cancel out. And that is strictly not taking in the maintenance or taking in...
Right, but they're paying, the employee is paying for the maintenance of the vehicle. The employee is paying for the insurance. And we're just reimbursing them whatever the IRS rate is.
Right, the 58.
So should that not be an option that we give?
Looking at some vehicles going 200,000 miles versus us hitting that threshold at 60,000 miles, it definitely can be a consideration. There is a big disparity there, but that does not take into the factors that you're alluding to, the insurance, the maintenance.
Marcus, I think Krista wants to talk on the liability of that.
Yeah, it's certainly, we would have to address myriad potential liability issues, but I think the larger concern, the overriding concern that Mr. Munoz has put forth is that it would really be cost prohibitive. We would be looking at spending $58,500 for 100,000 miles driven before taking into consideration.
But you're not adding in the maintenance costs, you're not adding in the insurance
No, I
costs.
understand.
So.
That is factored into
that-
the 58
that's what-
Factored into the cents per hour you get reimbursed.
per mile.
Per mile.
Yes,
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 I
it is.
understand that. I mean, it's not a novel idea. And
No, it's certainly an option, Supervisor Callaway, and I think especially for some, for certain positions, certain job functions, I obviously don't need a county vehicle. If I'm driving somewhere in my personal vehicle for county business, I get reimbursed at the IRS rate. There's a lot of different workers who we want to, for lack of a better, look official, right, and be showing up in a county vehicle as opposed to whatever their personal vehicle may be. So there are also, sort of non-economic factors at play.
I think I just feel, having spent years on this board, on this subject, that we are backwards. And I really look forward to seeing something that's a little bit more progressive and not, well, that's what we do. And oh, I want an emblem on my car, then get an emblem and slap it on the side of the car. And I just think, like Supervisor Garamendi said, I want to see something creative in housing. Well, I'd like to see something creative in the fleet. We've talked about it before. Can the building department and planning department share vehicles? If admin needs a vehicle, can they get a vehicle from the building department or planning department or environmental health without owning vehicles? We don't seem to have a mechanism to share the resources. Very expensive, as you pointed out. And I really like the idea of trying to go to electric vehicles where possible and charging stations for the public as well while we're in the process. Thank you.
Supervisor Stoppin?
I have two questions for Mark. With the leasing option, I was talking to a company not long ago, and they're having trouble acquiring other vehicles. And something in the conversation we went forward with is if you're only buying a couple, like 5 vehicles at a time, you're going to have a longer wait time than somebody that acquires 400 or 500 vehicles at a time. They get put forward on the list if they're buying more vehicles. So with a lease option, you have more opportunity to move forward on some of the vehicles possibly as opposed to going in ourselves and getting 5 at a time. Is that correct?
We would, yes, but unfortunately, with Enterprise, who we have our fleet management leasing through, they're at the mercy of the manufacturers. So when those order banks do open up, the quantity that they would be ordering for multiple customers, would be elevated, but still they're still at the mercy of the manufacturers.
Yeah, they would be elevated a little bit before us, though, if that were the case. So there,
and
there
when
would be a better opportunity to get it, even though they're providing not just to us, multiple other entities.
Yeah, so the manufacturers really look at the entity, Enterprise as a whole, and all of their customer base. So if there's, us and Sacramento County and San Francisco putting in orders at the same time, that provides higher volume and kind of gives us a little bit of a leg up in that area.
My other question is, the second part of my question is, with them holding back, we have new emission laws when it comes to diesels coming down as the county we have to abide by 2024. This leaves a lot of companies up in the air right now because they aren't able to replace those vehicles because they aren't being sold to people. Do we have that issue with our fleet right now?
Yeah, so specifically with our leased vehicles, they're all gas powered. With some of our diesel vehicles, that is something that our road superintendent, our equipment superintendent is looking at and working through and coming up with a plan for. The biggest piece of equipment that we had that would have been an issue would be our transport truck, which unfortunately drove its last drive last summer. So, we contract out the transport of our heavy equipment, so we don't have that piece of equipment to worry about, and that was our biggest concern, actually.
Thank you. Those are great answers. Appreciate it, Mark.
Absolutely.
I have a few more in a little bit, possibly, but Mr. Toffenelli has his light on.
Well, and Mark, you probably answered these questions, not so much the heavy equipment part of it, but when I think of a leased vehicle, it has a time frame on it, like generally 36 months or 5 years, and then it has a mileage cap on it. Each year, 10,000 miles or 12,000 miles. So if we lease these vehicles, and I'm assuming they're going to be something along those lines with the caps and the length of time, if you reach the maximum limit on the mileage, you start paying enormous amounts of money over the mileage as you get further and further along on it. So would we, if the 200,000 mile vehicles that Mark was talking about, we end up parking them in a parking lot because it's not cost effective to lease them until the lease is up, and then we can trade them in. I mean, those are some of the things that I see part of the lease. I'm not opposed to the lease of it, but I think some of these have to be worked out to the point where we're not spending a lot more because we have a vehicle that's over the mileage, and we still got another year and a year and a half to go before the lease is up on it. So does it make sense to keep driving and pay this big sum at the end and not get the $8,000 that we were talking about earlier? I'm just throwing the 8,000 like you did out there, that it reduces that to the point where it wasn't really cost effective. I think that's some of the issues that we need to look at on the lease part of it. So we're not getting in a situation where we end up again with a bunch of parked cars because it's not cost effective.
So there are a number of variables with that, Supervisor. The lease term for the light duty equipment we have, and we're only leasing light duty equipment, not the heavy equipment, so light duty vehicles. The lease term on the ones that we currently have is 60 months. I actually was on a Zoom meeting with our representative, our account manager this morning from Enterprise, and they're looking at different ways of doing things and helping their customers. One of the things, because of the shortage of vehicles these days, is vehicles are now worth much more. The F-350 that we bought a year and a half ago is almost worth more than we paid for it at this point. So they're working with some jurisdictions and some of their clients to actually turn over those vehicles sooner, so that they can, in some cases, realize a higher value for turning those vehicles in earlier. Thereby, when the next vehicle that's replacing that comes available, the initial cost is less. And we don't really actually have a cap on the number of miles. It basically would just reduce the resale amount at the amount of or at the end of the lease term, so that we would receive less money back to put towards the next vehicle that we would lease to replace that vehicle.
Yeah, but in effect, it does charge because, like you said, it reduces the value when you turn it if you're over the miles. So either way, you're paying for it, or you're getting a reduced value for it because of the miles. So you're paying either way. And just a thumb to throw out there that we need to remind, if we go in this way, that some of the things that we need to look at that could be redundant as far as.
Yeah, you're right. It does look at the overall value. It doesn't look at the mileage cap. So the overall value at the end of the lease term would be what would be the determining factor.
Thank you, Mark.
Supervisor Stoppa?
Yeah, very good points, Mr. Toffenelli. I've been talking to the positive ends of a lease. I haven't been riding the other side so much of it. But as we move forward, my thought behind this whole process is that we would move more towards a hybrid version and accessing the availability to the best dollar that we can is what I would maybe recommend at the end of this discussion.
Are there any other questions? Okay. I have a bunch of questions on electric. Okay, so as we fade into the electric mandate that we're going to be forced to do, knowing that the supply and demand is going to be complicated. But we have a bigger issue for campus is the infrastructure to support the electrical vehicles and with the off-site. So is there a phasing program with what's currently here on campus versus the infrastructure we're going to have to put at least facilities that the county utilizes, or are we also looking at partnerships? We just recently had this conversation at CTA about the concerns of putting the infrastructure on a lease facility rather than the own, especially with a short-term lease. And are those factors being considered as we go in and maybe partnering with our partners like the CTA because the buses, for example, the buses do come here. And, is that another option, not just for the buses, but as Supervisor Callaway said, for the public? And what does that look like? Because I don't see it happening all at once. And, we're going to focus here or where the majority of the cars are, which is HSS, over at another campus. And is that cost benefit to the county if we don't own the, and then backup supply? I mean, it just goes on and on. So how are we going to, I know we want to go electric, but there's a lot more cost that we're going to have to invest other than just a lease vehicle for that.
Very much so, and I think that there's a lot that would need to come down from the state first before we jump too far into it to really find out what they're doing, what they're providing. I think looking at locations is really important. When you look at how many charging stations, I think fleet size is going to probably be your number one, and getting your fleet really down to a manageable that you aren't sitting with a whole bunch of excess vehicles. And then it might be where HHSA, maybe it's more cost effective to just have charging stations at the government center, and if they need a vehicle, they're driving to the government center with them being so close. Because you're right, do you really want to put charging stations on a building property that you don't own versus we own the government center? So where does it make most sense? Which then also goes back to the topic of, centralized versus decentralized government offices and that topic. So there's a lot, I think it's a huge conversation that has to be had, and starting here, I think starting with smaller charging stations as you put some fleet on, working with COG to see what funding availability is there, because then you also look at, can the public use the county's charging stations? Do you charge? Is it a free service? Are gas stations going to be having charging stations? What are they going to be doing? I've noticed that there were a couple of hotels in Murphy's that have charging stations. So what are private companies doing? So maybe our need really is for our government vehicles, not necessarily the general public. So then do you put it behind a fence? Do you not put it behind a fence? It's a very, very big topic.
It is, and you don't know those charging stations that are being put in there, whether they're rapid charge or not. It could be you have to be parked there for 8 hours, so they charge overnight. And then the fact that you talked about government center or government property for our charging stations here at Government Center, I don't think that's going to work. We had this discussion at COG because a lot of the electric vehicles, as you go up country and higher you get, they rapidly lose their charge. And so we don't want to have an employee call us at 4:59 and say, hey, I'm stuck, I lost a charge, somebody's got to come get me or what have you. So there's going to have to be charging stations that we have to put in different areas to allow for a charge to be done, especially rapid charge. They have chargers now that they can charge like in 10 minutes and boom, you're on your way. The cost of that will be up front significant, but the cost over time, because we're not paying $6 a gallon for gas or whatever, or diesel, we would recover those costs because we're just charging and the charging station would be going. Although we'd be paying CPPA or we'd be paying PG&E wherever they're at or located at. But those are things that we need to look at. It's just not just putting here at Government Center. It's going to have to be strategically placed on where the most active parts of our fleets go in order to get recharged in an area that they know they can make and get to and be charged. They're not stuck and we're continuously getting phone calls because there's no charging station where they're at and they've use that charge. So there's a lot of things that need to be covered here.
I think right now, the requirement for electric vehicles is they only have to go 50 miles on a charge. That's the only requirement right now. Where come 2025, they're going to make that requirement. You have to have at least 150 miles on a charge. So that's another thing when looking at electric vehicles and implementing them in the fleet. Does it make sense to put a vehicle into our fleet right now that will, let's say, get 6 years, that is only getting 50 miles of charge right now when we live in a rural county that has a lot more mileage to cover, where maybe holding off closer to the 2025 where vehicles are coming with that longer charge because it makes more sense so they can at least get to their destination. We know there's a charging there so they can get back. It's definitely a lot more challenging for a rural county, 100%.
That 150-mile charge, it's on flat land when they charge. It's not our Conti going up, yeah. So.
And all the charging stations you mentioned that are on the outskirts in and around the county, they are not necessarily going to fit the vehicles that we have. Using Murphy's, for example, I think there are Teslas. So unless we're getting a fleet of Teslas, even in Copper in Town Square, we're not going to be able to, charge it. So those, while I love that they're out there, I don't think that should be a depending factor for the county when we don't know what kind of vehicle we're actually going to be getting, because it's not going to be compatible.
I don't see us getting Teslas.
It would be impressive.
Please, you're bugging me out. You're talking Tesla?
Supervisor Callaway.
Is that the reality? I mean, the rule might be 50 miles or 100, but that's not the reality of the vehicles that are being sold.
The majority right now, yes. Now, I believe it's mainly the Tesla is the only one that's above and beyond that, and the charging times. So it's just because Tesla is so popular and you hear all the benefits of that, that's what you think every electric vehicle is, but that's not the case. And then on average, most homes, and this is just on my research, so I'm limited to the articles that I've read and the research that I've done, but on average, you're getting 10 miles per hour charge if you're just plugging into a level 1 charger. If you're plugging into a level 2, I believe it ups it to like 25, and then it's the fast one that Tesla has. I think there's some other fast ones out there where you get 10 miles per minute, but on average you're waiting 4 to 6 hours for a normal charge on that vehicle.
Tesla has a 10-minute charge, rapid charge, and you can get up to 150 miles on that charge, 10-minute charge.
I mean, I don't know, my neighbors have a Tesla and they get 400 miles on a charge. So, I mean, that's...
That they're plugging overnight. I think if they're on the road, I think depending on how far they get, and I think that's where you get people that stop along the way because they'd rather, drive 200 miles and stop for 20 minutes versus drive the full 400 and then have to stop for an hour. But Tesla is one of the more aggressive with the fuel or the economy that it gets, the mileage economy that it gets per charge.
I'm sorry. What about the hybrid vehicles that, that are gas and battery operated?
So currently, I know HHSA has hybrid Ford Fusion models, but my understanding is that we're moving towards zero emission vehicles, so electric vehicles as a whole.
I see the sheriff is online.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Good afternoon, folks. I have a couple of questions. Number one question is, have you guys looped us into this? When I had talked to Krista about the maintenance program, we never talked about leasing any vehicles. And I don't know if Kathy Gomes remembers, but Rebecca Callan back in the day, we have leased vehicles, and it was not a good money issue for the county. It was not cost effective at all for what we do. So I'm kind of curious as if you guys have looped us into this, and if so, I have a few comments I'd like to make.
So, Sheriff, I'm just, Krista here, I'm just going to interject. So, I defer to my staff in terms of what their communications with your department have been. However, in terms of your Sheriff's Department vehicles specifically, what has been primarily contemplated would be leaving those out of the initial leasing program and instead addressing those issues in the policies and procedures that would apply more or less to countywide vehicles. That said, I hope I haven't misspoken here. I do want to defer to the team.
That is correct. What Krista stated is correct. Our thought is not to include the sheriff's vehicles at this point. Of course, if the direction of the board is different, we'll definitely run with that direction. We did reach out in terms of looking at the number of vehicles the sheriff's office does have, but we did not have any communication directly with your staff.
Okay, I appreciate that. The other thing I want to just bring to the board's attention, I know we're talking electric vehicles. I know Ford makes an all-electric vehicle now. The problem is, and Gary hit it very correctly, when you start driving the way we drive, as hard as we drive, and with the hills, you're not going to get 400 miles like they say they do, number one. I've talked to a few departments that are using some electric vehicles, and they're quite a bit less than what is advertised for the general public. And number two, I certainly don't want to have a shooting or something going on and saying, yeah, time out, bad guys, I got to stop and charge my vehicle and run back to the sheriff's office to get another vehicle. So this isn't something that we're addressing with the governor's office, State Sheriff's Association, because this is going to be a huge concern come 2035 or 2034, whenever his gasoline banned vehicle program comes into play, if that actually happens. It's for rural counties, it's a huge issue that we cannot run a gas vehicle. That's just for the electric side. I'm all about going green if at all possible, but I just don't see that happening right now until they get some better technology with the vehicles. And back to the lease vehicles, I can sit down with the CAO's office at another time if you want and talk about the program that we talked with Enterprise quite a while back. And it's not feasible, but thank you for leaving us out of it at this point. And then I know we don't have vehicles really to share, because the vehicles that we have that are grant vehicles are specific to patrol and some other areas. So I just, again, my concern was whether we were involved in this, because I hadn't been talked to. So thank you for your time. And any questions if you guys have.
Understood, Sheriff. Thank you.
Can the Bearcat be an electric vehicle?
No.
Oh, it is electric. I didn't tell you that.
Supervisor Stopper?
I recently looked at the Fords also, Rick, and it's, you're absolutely right. Highway miles for 300 miles are completely different than the amount of energy it takes to drive up and down the hill, especially if you're carrying cargo, towing a trailer, or anything else. So it's not even functional for me quite yet, although we would all like to go greener sooner, no pun intended on any other issues. But, and from what I'm hearing right now, and them saying to Sheriff that the intention right now is to let them continue without going to lease, is I kind of hearing that you're already suggesting a hybrid. Or, it would have to be a hybrid.
It's worth researching, and I think that's really where that needs assessment comes into, to really, again, just see how many vehicles we have just sitting, what really are the miles. As Marco spoke to, I did email all counties with fleet to just get a generic overview of their fleet, But it was really just a high dive just to kind of get our feet wet. I think there's a more in-depth analysis that could be done. And yeah, on our research, Marcus and I both really kind of liked that hybrid model and felt that it would lessen the fleet management or the fleet footprint, and thought it could be managed kind of status quo right now with no additional staff needed to create kind of a pooled, from a generic, just looking right now, start into it. So we wouldn't be looking at changing every department into a pooled vehicle and having to manage. We talked about the grant funding, the different non-general, the special needs, the sheriff's are definitely special needs. We would even have to talk with like probation, because we kind of considered them special needs. It doesn't mean every general fund, but from a high look, administration, facilities, building, planning, all of them, you really could probably look at a hybrid model.
Thank you. Good answers. I appreciate it.
I see Corey's been patiently raising her hand.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Corey Allen, Health and Human Services Agency Director. This is the first I'm hearing of the exciting opportunities that you're looking at, but I do also notice a lot of reference to the vehicles here at the Health and Human Services Agency campuses. I simply want to just put out to the public that there are over 200 employees that utilize that significant fleet, and the type of work being done cannot be accounted for in a daily anticipation of what we're going to use on a vehicle. Wendy Alt's team at any moment can be called to manage a critical need of a person in crisis. Our Child Welfare Services team would need a vehicle at a moment's notice to respond to child abuse. And I could go on and on between our veterans team and their response to the community, the public health team in response to certain emergencies that come up. So I do anticipate that with Marcos's experience in Health and Human Services, he's also analyzed that. And of course, as mentioned before, grant funding and so forth. So, but thank you for bringing this out to the public. I'm just glad to be hearing this information.
Thank you, Corey. Supervisor Garamendi.
I would just wanted to comment to share. I support the hybrid model too. I don't think we really want the sheriff driving around in a smart car. Trading in his F-150 for that, although it would be a sight to watch him figure out how to fold himself into that small vehicle.
I'd like to see him drive a smart car.
Are there any other board questions or comments? You guys did a really great job with the presentation today. I think you're on the right path from what you've heard from most of us. And I look forward to seeing what you guys have to bring back. With that, I am going to allow for public comment. I don't believe we've done that yet. No.
There is no public comment.
Okay, thank you. I think this was informational only, and direction, I think you've got are there any clarifications you guys need?
I think by the end of the year, we'll bring policy and procedures forward, kind of looking at that hybrid model and see what we can come up with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We're pretty much getting wrapped up here, huh? So next on the agenda is supervisory announcements. So I will start to my left with Supervisor Calaveras. Oh,
Sorry, may I interrupt for just a moment?
Yes.
I just wanted to read item number 18 into the record, just so it's on record and that it was withdrawn by the department. Is that okay with you?
yes, please do. Thank you for correcting me.
Item number 18 is from Economic and Community Development, a discussion of the Central Sierra Broadband Roadmap, draft final report, survey results, and recommend next steps. The item requested that it be withdrawn, the department requested that the item be withdrawn and brought back at a future date.
Thank you. That I'll start with Supervisor Callaway.
This Saturday is Earth Day, and there'll be a tradition, an event at Utica Park and Angels Camp. And Monday is Central Sierra Child Support Meeting that Supervisor Tuffanelli and I will be at.
Thank you, Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you very much. We have a UMRA meeting on Friday, and I will be meeting with Insurance Commissioner Lara and representatives from Amador and Sacramento County and Rancho Murieta to follow up to the meetings that he had here, I guess, 24 months ago, actually right before COVID, about home insurance, and I'll report back if there's any good news from that meeting.
Thank you. Vice Chair Toffenau.
I have nothing to report right now.
Supervisor Stopper.
Another remindal of the 22nd Annual Kids Fishing Clinic, Saturday, May 7th, 2022, from 9 a.m. till 1 p.m. It says grades 1st through 8th, but if your kid's 4 and not going to school, I'm all right with them showing up. Please bring them. It'll be on the South Algiers Road at the, behind the Murphy's Park at the park, or behind the Murphy's Hotel at the park. So please, everyone show up, and if you supervisors want to volunteer your time and help some kids out having a good day, please show up. It's a good time.
Will there be food available, Supervisor Stopper?
I'll be slinging hot dogs, brother.
There you go.
There's some logs in the creek. Can the Fish and Game Commission help pull them out?
You can.
Y'all did volunteer your time.
Miss Callaway, I will talk to them, but I don't know what we're voluntold, so we'll move forward.
You have waiters because you're Fish and Game. You should be able to get in the creek and pull these logs out.
Tell you what, I'll stop by the Murphy's Hotel and leave a couple dollars in your district on the way out. Thank you.
I just want you to pull a log out.
Whatever that means.
And I have nothing to report. And with that, I think we're at the end of our meeting, and we will see everyone next week. Thank you.